once I got towards the end of the PPL, I think I really ignited this desire to keep learning, and I'm sure most people in aviation agree that it's that constant bettering of yourself. But once I got on that treadmill, I never want to get off it now, and so you're always looking to the next thing.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Fly the Transition podcast. So glad you're able to take some time out and listen to another inspiring episode. So before we jump into today's episode, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's taken time to listen to the Fly the Transition relaunch podcast that came out last week featuring Brian Turner. I've got a lot of great feedback already, and I really appreciate all of you who reached out to share your kind words and your constructive feedback in some cases to help make the show better. So I am really excited that so many of you enjoyed the relaunch of the podcasts, the direction we're headed, and I hope we can carry that momentum as we continue pushing out episodes in the coming weeks. There is one other piece of news I want to share before we get into the interview for this episode, and that is the Discord community that is being created around this podcast. One of the things I hope to achieve with the Fly the Transition podcast was sharing the inspiring stories of others as they make their leap into a career in aviation. As of the recording of this episode, I have 21 interviews in the can ready to produce and turn into episodes. But one of the themes that developed here is a lot of people would say something like, hey, if people have questions, they can reach out to me here, or if people want to talk more about this part of my story, have them reach out. So that's where I worked into creating the Discord community so that there would be a place for people to meet and interact and ask those questions in a forum type of environment. If you're not familiar with Discord, it is just an online server where we can create a community and have those conversations. So if you are interested in joining that Discord server and joining in on the conversation, just send me an email as flythetransition@gmail.com and I will send you the invite. All right, as we get ready to get into this week's episode, a few words from those who make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Aviation friends, let me share with you an absolute game changer in eyewear. I am personally hooked on Flying Eyes optics. Their stylish designs pair seamlessly with your headset for superior comfort. I used to fly with those cheap gas station sunglasses, but since switching to Flying Eyes, I can't go back. They're sleek, durable, and way more comfortable. Trust me, your eyes deserve the upgrade. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes, and make sure you use code FlyingMidwest10 for an unbeatable 10% off your purchase at Flying Eyes. Fly with comfort, fly with style. Visit Flying Eyes Optics today. Attention aviators. If you're passionate about flying, you need to check out Pilot Quarters. They are a pilot-owned family business based right in the Midwest in Michigan. They are on a mission to create your next favorite flying shirt. From comfy camp shirts to stylish polo shirts, sundresses, and tees, Pilot Quarters crafts unique aviation apparel. Choose from full-color chart designs, subtle overlays, or even wild tropical pattern blends with your favorite charts. Elevate your style and aviation passion. Visit pilotquarters.com today and soar in style.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
Alrighty, we're ready to get into this week's episode. This week, we talk with David. David worked in the music industry over in the UK and was a tour manager for a number of musical acts there. but now he's worked his way into aviation. So David didn't grow up with like aviation in his blood from a family member who was a pilot or anything like that, but he did have a good deal of exposure in his early years. He grew up near Heathrow Airport and talks about watching the Concorde as he was growing up, as well as attending a lot of air shows and museums, learning more about aviation. But he also grew up in a musical household, and as he'll explain, he, in his earlier years, often would take the path of least resistance. So to him, music came easy to him, and that's the direction he went with his career. But he wouldn't be on this podcast if he didn't make a transition into aviation. And we talked not just about him becoming a flight instructor, but doing so in England, which for many of us probably listening to this podcast is maybe a little bit foreign to us. So him and I do take a good deal of time and talk a bit about flying in England as well. So it was a really interesting interview for me, expanding my own horizons and learning about flight instruction in another country. All right, let's get into our interview. Welcome, David, to the Fly the Transition podcast. All right, so David, can you run me through what your background of aviation is? Like, how did you get into it?
It was kind of on and off. I grew up going to air shows with my mum. She was really supportive, and she used to take me to Heathrow. We lived 20 minutes away from Heathrow Airport, so we would go and stand on top of the terminal and watch the planes. And where I grew up as well, Concorde used to fly over all the time. You know, every morning and evening it would go out, and school would have to stop because it was so loud that lessons would just stop. So, yeah, it was pretty awesome. Now that I think about it, it's so sad we don't have it anymore, but it was just something we took for granted back then. Yeah, I used to go to air shows a lot and bug my mum to take me to museums and stuff when I was a kid, so that was fun. And then growing up was doing lots of music, and I'd wanted to get into the Air Force, and I think I realized that I probably wasn't smart enough to do that. And so the kind of idea of flying just kind of went away, and I'd never thought about it for quite a while.
Talk to me about what direction you did go then for a career initially.
Much like water and electricity, path of least resistance. So whatever was the easiest thing throughout my formative years, I went towards that. Music, basically. I grew up in a very musical family, started playing violin when I was 3, moved over to the drums when I was 12. And music was always the easiest thing. So when I didn't do well in exams in certain subjects, I would just kind of go towards music, which was always just totally easy, of course, because I've been doing it my whole life. And it turns out the music education, at least in this country, up to what you guys would call college level or we call university level, is just ridiculously easy if you've been doing it for any time other than just at school. So that was always the easiest thing. I was pretty lazy growing up. So music was just absolutely the easiest thing. Went to music college, formed a band, was the drummer in the band. And if you're a drummer, you learn logistics from day one because you've got to lug a drum kit around. You can't jump on a bus with a you can't, even going up to London to play gigs, you still got to drive your car into town. So, from the age of 17, as soon as I could drive, I was lugging the drum kit around to shows in London. And then my band toured for around, on and off for about 5 years, put out a couple of records. And then when that came to an end, my band's tour manager offered me some work driving vans around for other bands. And then from there, I kind of picked up learning how to be a tour manager because I'd already tour managed my own band for 5 years without realizing it. And it turns out that if you can tour manage your own band, you can do it with other bands and get paid to do it. And then that was 8 years of my life doing that.
So for those that maybe aren't familiar, what would the role of a tour manager be typically?
Well, from the moment a tour is booked, the management who you would generally have contact with as a tour manager through, having worked with them in the past, would reach out, here are the tour dates, put a budget together, depending on what the budget is, put the crew together, submit the budget and build an itinerary from there, and it's all yours. So you manage absolutely everything, flights, travel, ground travel as well, hotels, all of the equipment rentals, dealing with every single promoter at each venue, making sure that each venue is set the way that you want it before you arrive. Pretty much everything, dealing with merchandise companies. It depends, the bigger the tour, obviously, the more segregated the roles are. But for, the first 5 years of touring, for most people, it's going to be you in a van with the band, driving them around, tour managing them, sleeping on floors if necessary, and, really slumming it. So average working day is probably 18 hours a day, and you'll be doing, 5 shows a week. So it's, it builds your stamina quite well.
I bet it does.
So, yeah.
Did you work any real big notable tours or anything like that, or just local bands? Or?
No. I did some big stuff. I mean, I went around the world. Do you know musician Anderson .Paak? Have you heard of him?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I have to look later.
He's in a group at the moment with Bruno Mars called Silk Sonic, and he's won a few Grammys. It's kind of like hip hop, soul, funk, that kind of thing. I was his tour manager for quite a few years, and we did worldwide stuff. We did a tour with Bruno Mars. So I've done, I did shows at like Red Rocks, Jimmy Fallon, that kind of thing. So I've done all those places.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was good fun. Lots and lots of other bands that no one's ever heard of that have, done very little with their lives, but that was definitely the biggest thing. We did a show at Brixton Academy in London, which is like, one of the biggest, big theatre venues in London. We did that with Dr. Dre. So yeah, had some good notable career highlights for sure doing that job, and also some real bad times as well, but that's the job.
Yeah. So in that job, is it mostly just the background stuff, or like day of show, are you doing stuff as well?
Oh, you're doing everything every day. Yeah. So you're doing all of the background stuff, so that's called advancing. And then when you're out on the tour itself, you are the band's representative on tour. They don't generally travel with a manager; they'll just travel with their tour manager. So you are the point person for the band to deal with, for the promoter to deal with, the venue, anyone else, press. If they've got local label people in each town, or they've got to go to an interview, like that's all you. Basically, the buck stops with you. If anything goes wrong, it's your fault. If anything goes right, it's the band get the credit. So
sure,
it's a pretty thankless task.
Sure, I bet.
That's all good. I had my time in the limelight when I was drumming in a band, and I didn't enjoy it as much as tour managing.
So you have a pretty interesting gig going on. How does the pull of aviation grab hold again?
In about 2016, 17, I was living back in London underneath the final approach path for 27 of Heathrow, and just like any major international airport, the planes would run from 6 a.m. till 11 p.m. every minute of every day. And after a while, the kind of nagging of these planes got to me and was like, "You like planes?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I think I like planes." And I was just looking up at them thinking, "Oh, imagine if you could fly that." And I was like, "Oh wait, that's what I wanted to do at one point in my life." And I thought, but what if I just wanted to do it for fun? I wonder if that's a thing. And I'd never even thought, probably aged, I don't know, 28, 29. I'd never even really considered that you could fly planes for fun. And I don't know why, but when you realize that you'd never even thought about something, and when you do realize it, you think, that was so stupid, how did I not think about it? But weirdly, it never even occurred to me that would be something that I could think about. So anyway, I looked into it, did all the typical research when you discover that there's, PPL, CPL, ATPL, all that stuff. And that's kind of where it began. So then I went to my local flying school and had a trial lesson. Hated that school, went to another school, did my PPL with them. That school then got bought out by the original school that I'd gone to. So I went back to them and finished everything off. And towards the end of the PPL, it was, very near the end of the syllabus, and we were doing all the landaways and stuff, all the long navs. And I had this kind of feeling. I was like, wait, this is almost over. Like, this journey of learning and, getting my license is almost over, but I don't feel anywhere near competent enough to be out in a plane on my own. But I just felt like if I want to keep flying enough to stay current and stay good, I need to win the lottery because it's too expensive. And so I said to my instructor, I was like, well, I've got this far. Like, do you think I could go commercial? She was like, yeah, absolutely. Just go for it. I was like, well, I'm 30. She's like, so loads of people change later in life. And I was like, okay, cool. So it kind of went from there. So I went to a commercial school after it took me about a year and a half, 2 years or so, just, with the delays of getting into schools and things. And before COVID, there were huge training backlogs. I don't know how it was in the States, but over here, there was 18-month delays to get into flight schools. So I went through the whole rigmarole of that. In the meantime, went and did an internship at an airline for a while doing dispatch, which was really good fun, out in Latvia, of all places. That was great fun. Yeah, why not? And then tried to get into one flight school. Didn't get in because I hadn't bothered to practice all the aptitude stuff beforehand. I'd never flown a plane through a box before. I didn't realize that that's what flying an aircraft involves. Turns out that's like the whole thing, right? Flying planes through boxes on screens. But yeah, then I got into another flight school, which then about a month before I was due to start, they said, turns out that they had moved me from one school to the other without bothering to tell me. And so I was meant to start in Portugal, ended up studying in the UK instead, which actually worked out really well. And yeah, finally finished the whole commercial journey. I did an integrated course, so it was all, everything was all in one package. Towards the end of that course, I'm sure it's pretty similar what you guys do in a kind of commercial ATPL sense. But there's the final bit that's like a mini type rating where you do multi-crew cooperation training, and you do 40 hours in either, basically a 7.3 or a 320 sim. And it was the least enjoyable thing I've ever done. And it really cemented to me that the thing that I want to do is fly planes and not computers, basically. And I'd been watching a lot of GA content on YouTube, a lot of people just flying, a lot of old men just flying tail draggers from one farm strip to another. And I thought, that's the kind of stuff I want to do if I'm going to be flying. At least, that's how I feel at the moment. I kind of realized that the main way to be paid to be flying at this point is to do instruction. And unlike in the States where pretty much everyone does that, right, to get their 1,500 hours, airlines over here will take you straight out of flight school with 150 hours. Because it's the Colgan thing, is right? Is that what triggered that?
Yeah.
As always, it's one thing that leads to changes. Yep. So yeah, we don't have that at all. People come straight out of flight school and they'll go straight into into a first officer role. So for me, instructing was a definite choice. I mean, a lot of people do it here to build up their hours, but ideally they're just going to get recruited straight away out of flight school.
Okay.
But for me, I've been instructing now. I've got about 600 hours, so I've only done a few months, but I'm loving it more than anything. And more thought of going and sitting in front of a computer and pressing buttons all day, just, I don't know, doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Stick and rudder feels great. Really enjoy it.
So you talked a bit about you're living in London. You see, you're watching the planes flying up. You said Heathrow, right?
Yeah.
As you're watching that and kind of deciding which direction you're going to go, did you have like a defining moment or like a revelation that aviation should be your thing?
It was quite insidious. I clearly remember researching into different ways to be a pilot and looking at an ATPL and looking at, again, like with the laziness, looking at the amount of ground school that's required, the 14 subjects and, the fact that it takes 6 months. And I just thought, no, I'm good. I won't do that. Did my PPL. But once I got towards the end of the PPL, I think I really ignited this desire to keep learning. And I'm sure most people in aviation agree that it's that constant bettering of yourself. I saw what was available from the beginning and thought, no way. But once I got on that treadmill, I never want to get off it now. And so you're always looking to the next thing, the next thing on the ladder to build up your skills, I guess. So now I'm very much in it. But I think it was at the time I wanted to go and do my ATPL integrated training. And I guess I thought that I was going to become an airline pilot because that was the thing to do. But the more now I've seen into that, the less I'm interested in it. Although the money's good, but I've had a well-paid job in the past and I didn't really enjoy it.
I want to explore a little bit maybe the differences between flying in the States and flying over there.
Awesome, yeah.
What are the different routes that you can go to get do you guys call it a private certificate or something else?
Yeah, we call it a PPL, private pilot's license.
Okay.
There's two types of training schools. You've got DTOs and ATOs. So basically, if you're in a DTO, you can only do private training. You can't teach towards the commercial. And then the ATO is more of a kind of an official, more oversight from the Civil Aviation Authority, essentially. The routes that people generally go to get their private licenses, they come to one of the two types of schools. We have like a national, it's all getting a bit complicated, but we have, because of the UK's association with EASA and now the fact that we're away from it. And before EASA, we were our own thing as well. So there's been in living memory, 3 different iterations of how our Civil Aviation Authority have done licensing. So it gets a bit complicated. We've got the PPL, we've got the national PPL, and then we've got the LAPL, the Light Aircraft Pilot's License.
Okay.
It basically allows you to fly stuff like ultralights under 2 tons and only in the UK and only G-Reg aircraft, basically. So what most people do is they just get their private license, which is pretty similar from what I understand you guys do. However, what I think you guys, from what I hear, seem to do a lot better is this whole oral part of the check ride. We don't have that. Essentially, there's a couple of questions as you're taxiing in. Oh, what would you do if your gyro failed? That's about it.
Yeah, you'd be spending about an hour on the ground.
Right, nah.
At least before you can get in the plane.
No, that doesn't happen at all. Even on my commercial and on my instrument check ride, as you guys call it, nothing. It just, We just don't have a culture of all requesting. I mean, for the commercial a little bit, the examiner pulled out a chart and pointed at a thing and was like, what's that? That was about it. I mean, my instrument rating test, to be fair, was a Friday afternoon thing, and I don't think the guy was particularly interested in being there for too much longer. I think he wanted to go to the pub. So I think I got quite lucky because apparently he's quite brutal at times. So I definitely got off lightly. But no, in general, that's the main difference that I understand in terms of the check ride. We just don't do the oral stuff at all, which is, I think, not good. Also, you guys have to do a check every 2 years, is that right? Like a full, do you have to basically do the whole, okay, is it as bad or?
It's not as bad. You don't have to do that with they call it a designated pilot examiner. Your flight review can be done by an instructor.
Oh, okay.
And there's a number of things that they have to check off that they've gone over with you that are similar to the requirements for your basic private pilot license anyways.
Yeah.
And then you do a flight portion. That it has to be an hour ground, hour in the air.
Okay.
Are the minimums.
Yeah, ours is again, more lax as well. As long as you've done, in the second of the 2 years of your rating, as long as you've done an hour with an instructor, then you're good. And that can be literally an hour with the instructor sat there not saying a word, and they still have to sign it off. Yeah. So, look, I mean, most people are good with it, and they'll say, right, I want to go out and do some stalls, I want to go and do some circuits, pull the power on me, let's do some PFLs. And then, but I've never had it yet, but apparently some people just say, right, I'm just paying you for an hour to sit here, I'm not interested, we're just going to go somewhere, and I just want you to be quiet. I think most people are more responsible than that, but obviously that's the problem that we have. But again, this stuff's all pushed based on, accident reviews and safety and stuff, and they obviously feel like over here that it's good enough because people aren't crashing so much that it's worth changing. The other difference, our CFI is actually the chief flying instructor, whereas I am just a FI, just a flying instructor. I know you guys use CFI for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Also, you guys have a big culture of, a lot of people go into the instructing route and then the instructing route, teaching instructors, right? They're few and far between here. There are not many people teaching instructors over here. There's a few courses that you can go and do, but it's not a typical route for people to go down. And I think to be an instructor, you need, I think, at least 1,000 hours of instruction. So most people aren't doing that on the route to joining the airlines because by 1,000 hours, they've probably already got their first job.
Oh, sure, you're gone.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to be an instructor for 2 years before you can instruct.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's probably about 1,000 hours. Yeah, that's probably about the same for us. Yeah.
So before we talk about your role as an instructor, what was the most satisfying part of your training?
Out of everything that I've done so far, the instructor training was probably the most satisfying, and it has made my flying. It made me realize how terrible a pilot I was before that. I cannot believe that I had a PPL and a CPL and everything coming out of all of that training with 250 hours. I'm amazed that I didn't crash. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but still, like my lack of understanding of what I was actually doing with an aircraft, once you've instructed, it's a whole nother level. And I think that's why I'm enjoying it now so much, because I really understand flying more than I ever did before. And I think I understand it as much as I wanted to initially, which is why I got into it. I think a big part of me doing the training was I wanted to know how planes flew. It wasn't so much that I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to understand what was going on and how it worked. And now I'm kind of there and I can do it and I can explain it to people. And there's a lot of satisfaction in that, especially when you actually talk through something on the ground and then go and demonstrate it and it works out. And there's a lot of satisfaction in that. And the ability to be repetitive as well. And it's not just a fluke. You can always configure an aircraft correctly on base legs so that it is flying itself down to the ground. And that's a really satisfying thing to be able to do and then kind of show off to your students as well.
So for your progression, what are your timelines for how long it took you for each of your, you guys don't call them ratings, for each of your licenses? How long did that take? What was that journey like?
We use the word license in terms of private pilot license or commercial license, and then we use ratings for, single engine rating or multi or instrument.
Okay.
My PPL, so my private license took about a year. Actually, yeah, it was pretty much bang on a year. I was going off and touring at times in between, so I probably could have done it a bit quicker. Annoyingly, at one point near the end, I had to go and do a month or so, and I was ready for test, and then couldn't do the test because I was away, and then I had to do a bit more revision when I got back. So that took about a year. My ground school took 6 months, and then we had 6 months off because of COVID. Sorry, my ATPL, so my commercial ground school took 6 months, which is pretty standard. If you're going to go and do it in a classroom, that's generally how long it takes. And then COVID hit, so I had 6 months off. And then my commercial multi and instrument rating, and then all the other stuff. We do UPRT as well. I don't know if you guys do upset prevention recovery training. So you basically go out in a aerobatic aircraft and basically recreate Air France stall, crash, and spins, things like that. But I think in total that took me around 18 months or so of the actual flying part. Flying in the UK in winter is, as you can imagine, basically non-existent. If I look through my logbook even from my commercial training during January and February, it's like 3 hours or something. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And now being an instructor, living through that, yeah, it's grim. But yeah, it took a while. But a lot of flight schools in the UK go out to Arizona or Florida or whatever to do all their basic training, which I completely understand. Yeah, trying to learn the visual stuff over here in the winter is just impossible. But they obviously everyone has to come back here to do the instrument rating because it needs to be a UK instrument rating.
As you're working through those ratings, are you still working full time with your other job?
Basically, after I finished my private license, it was at that point that I was like, right, I'm done with touring. I want to go and do aviation full time, and I assumed I wanted to be an airline pilot of some sort. So at that point, no, I was fully focused on just doing this. Luckily, my business still pays me a salary, so I've kind of I'd always had revenue coming in from various sources to kind of keep me afloat throughout my flight training. So that was pretty handy. But when COVID hit, obviously everything shut down overnight, and then I went and did supermarket deliveries for about 6 months or so, which was pretty good. I'd rather do that than just sit at home watching Netflix for 6 months. So
sure.
When I finished my instrument rating and everything, I had a few months off, so I went and did a couple of tours, but it was only a few days here and there, really just with bands that are friends from over the years that I thought would be fun to hang with.
So you started a little bit down the route of being an airline pilot. And I know that we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth on it. So what does that look like over in the UK? And at what point did you kind of make that determination that this isn't for me? The airline part, at least.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, airline has never really interested me unless they were something like a DC-6 or something. I grew up watching World War II films, so if it doesn't have a propeller, to me, it's not cool. Obviously, anything with a turboprop is still cool because it's a propeller. So that's where I draw the line. So if I was going to want to go into airlines, the only thing I would want to fly would be, the ATR or the Dash 8, and that's, because that's pretty much all we have over here in terms of turboprops. But how far I went into the airline thing? Well, yeah, as I said, the final part of our training is what's it called? Airline Pilot Standard Multi-Crew Cooperation Course. So it's basically sitting in an A320 sim and learning to be a co-pilot and learning multi-crew, because obviously up to that point you've done nothing multi-crew. And yeah, it was 40 hours. Everything about it just really wasn't interesting to me. You know how like most of the training, it starts off really difficult and then you get over the hump and it gets better and you get towards the end and you're loving it and you're like, I can't wait to do more of this. This was not that. This was I got over the hump and I was like, thank God this is almost over. I never want to do this again. And I think that was it. But the airfield that I'm based out of, the main aircraft that operate there, apart from us doing training, is PC-12s. And that kind of thing I would like to do. There's a couple of King Airs that come in and out, but mostly it's PC-12s. So that's the kind of thing I wouldn't mind doing. That kind of flying seems pretty good fun, pretty versatile stuff. Landing in people's back gardens and things. That does seem quite fun. But anything bigger than that and more corporate in terms of, large companies and stuff, I'm just not really interested in. I like working in companies where I know everyone and they're not, like you're not one of 1,000 pilots. I'd rather be one of 5, I wanted to get my integrated PPL and do all of that because I wanted to do loads of training and I figured that was the best way to do lots of training. And actually I got a really good deal on doing the whole integrated course. The more I learned about that side of things, the less I was interested in going into the airlines.
Okay, so the airlines weren't for you, and you talked earlier about becoming an instructor instead. So what kind of challenges did you face, rewarding moments, things like that?
My first day instructing, I went back to one of my old flight schools that I flew, that I did some training at. I'd been told, when you start out, just make sure you do a couple of trial flights each day and just no. That did not happen. They were like, we need you to go and do PFLs, and then we need to go and teach stalling. And I was like, right, I've never taught ever this stuff, and it was pretty terrifying. But you just have to walk in, and I think I learned from tour managing, you just have to walk into the room with the confidence. And, if you're wearing the right hat, people know who you are, and they just, not look up to you, but you take on the role of the instructor. And if you're going in there with, a weak handshake and no confidence, they're going to see right through you. And so you just have to not fake it, because I'd been trained how to teach all of that stuff, of course. But yeah, those first few weeks when you're learning your own style of instruction, because obviously up until this point, all you've been taught is how to teach it from the perspective of the person that taught you. Again, you're learning their habits, so you need to develop your own. So those first few weeks were pretty interesting, learning how each lesson actually works in real life. That was definitely quite challenging. The main issue I suppose I'm having, I'm sure a lot of people have, is just with certain students where there's no progression in each lesson. It's just so upsetting. It's really, you internalize it and you feel like you're not teaching them correctly. But the more and more I do that, I think, no, I've been pretty clear with this, and they're just not taking on board what I'm saying. And some people just don't have the capacity. And that's, I've not given up on anyone yet. But no, there are definitely certain students that are really, not testing my patience, but they challenge you and they make you really figure out a new way to teach things. However, saying that, one of the real good rewards is once you break through to a student and they have that aha moment, where it might be because you've explained it well, or it might be that they've finally tried it enough times that they've got enough capacity and they've finally figured it out. And they, like a student the other day was like, oh, so if I lower the nose a bit more on base leg, I can get it trimmed for 70 and it will stay at 70 and the nose won't keep coming up. And I was like, that's what I've been trying to tell you for the last 5 hours in the circuit. I'm glad you figured it out. I mean, I was telling you the whole time, but it doesn't matter until you figure something out yourself.
Right.
And that patience, especially with some students, you do just have to sit there and just keep going back at it and again and again and again until it clicks. And then you're like, thank God, now we can move on. Yeah, coming off the back of the challenge is the reward, hopefully. Sometimes I don't like when sometimes you've been teaching something and you can just feel that you've just not taught it very well and the lesson is nearly over and it hasn't really clicked with this student. And I just feel like, great, I've just wasted like £250 of their money and they're going to have to redo this lesson and it's kind of my fault. That's not great, I got to admit, but hopefully it happens less and less the more I instruct. And if we had an ideal world, obviously we would spend the first 500 hours of instructing just practicing instructing, but unfortunately no one has that kind of universe that we can do that in yet. I don't know, maybe we'll find another alternate reality where we can do that. Maybe we do it in AI.
As you're working towards becoming an instructor, what are the steps that they have you take there to become an instructor?
So you have to have either have done like integrated flight training, so a full integrated course, or you have to have done it modular, but have, I can't remember the hour requirements because it never applied to me, but something like either 150 or 200 or something hours of PIC, something quite high. Then the course itself is about 4 days of ground school of just the kind of psychology of teaching and learning.
Okay.
Teaching you how to do briefings, make sure you make eye contact and use lots of different colors on the board and use lots of different things, not just the board, but use, instruments and models of aircraft, all the kind of stuff that you'd expect, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of the course, you are taught the PPL syllabus. So every single lesson you are taught it. So each flight is 2 lessons. You basically are taught a lesson and then you teach back to your instructor the previous lesson that they've shown you. And you just work through the course like that. So you've basically done the PPL course at least twice by the time you finished the instructor course.
Okay.
I was lucky. It was a heat wave when I did mine and I managed to get it done in 4 weeks. But it generally does 6 to 8 weeks for most people. And then at the end, you have a final assessment of competence where you have to give the examiner like a long brief on a subject. So generally it's done on an accident report. Most people seem to do it that way. Focus on an accident report, focusing on the threat and error side of things, which takes about 45 minutes. And then you do a load of theory. So this is actually like the US kind of oral thing where you will do about an hour or so based on, there's a standards document, standards doc 10, that has, it's about 18 pages or so of questions on the PPL theory side of things. And you have to know every single answer, of course, because your students will ask you this stuff.
Yeah.
And so then you get questioned on basically those kind of questions. So the examiner will ask you, well, how does the ASI work? And then you'll mention something. They'll go, oh, okay, you told me about that. So what's that then? Oh, what's that? And they'll basically work through all of the 9, theory subjects just through, a rolling kind of load of questions. And then you finally go and do your assessment of competence. First, you brief the examiner on one of the lessons that you're going to do. So I did turning part 1. And then you'll go and teach them that. And then once they're done with that, they will then get you to do, teach me a PFL or talk me through the stall recovery or something like that. And then you'll come back and do some circuits. And that's basically it. It was probably the worst flying I've ever done. I was incredibly nervous on my test. And as we landed and taxied in, he went, yeah, it was good enough. And that was it.
And you're doing that all for the right seat, I assume?
Yes. Yeah. I've not flown left seat for a while now. Occasionally I do. We have this old boy at our flight school that learned to fly there in 1954. He is incredible. He's 85 years old. Oh, his career is amazing. He was in the Air Force. He used to fly those Vampires very early, probably Gen 1 kind of jets. And he used to land them on, carriers and stuff. He then went on to develop Autoland in the TriStar at Heathrow. He then managed Heathrow Airport and some other airports. So absolutely incredible guy. Anyway, he still flies to this day, but he always flies right-hand seat because he was an instructor. So he gave up his medical about 5 years ago. So now we just sit left-hand seat, and he just goes out and does 20 minutes every few days just to keep his hand in. So, yeah, that's the only time that I ever really fly left-hand seat, and it feels pretty weird now. So I need to spend more time in that seat just to get used to it again. Because even when I self-hire now, I always sit right-hand seat, even when it's just me on board, which is kind of weird, but I'm just so used to it.
I did my first right-hand seat flight, and I'm like, what am I doing over here? The sight picture's all off, and my muscle memory.
Yeah. And also the parallax when you're whenever when you're looking at the DI from diagonal, your students have it always looks like it's out, or with the RPM when they're doing power checks, you've got the RPM in front of you, but they've got the parallax. And so you kind of learn you learn to account for the parallax, I suppose, which is quite a good part of it as well. It takes getting used to, but like anything, once you're there,
sure,
you don't think about it anymore.
So have you had like a specific moment at all in your instructing that stands out as like a really rewarding moment, or maybe just a standout kind of story at all, or not?
Oh yeah. So actually it's quite topical because I just did two. I don't know how it is with you guys. You have a turn point procedure or something with our nav. It's very regimented, or at least that's how we teach it. Obviously the students never do it because capacity, but the idea, obviously, you turn overhead to feature, you start the stopwatch, you check your heading, your altitude, your time, you check the DIs aligned, and then you do a gross error check, as in, does this look correct? Do I have the coast to, ahead of me? If I'm pointing at Heathrow, I'm probably going to bus control airspace, so I might have got the heading wrong off my log. And so I had a student that I was flying with a while ago, and he turned at a turning point, and he looked down at his blog, and he had read that it said 030, and actually it was meant to be 300 was what he's meant to be flying. And so we are pointing to the left of this airport, and I know for a fact that it's meant to be on our right because obviously I've done this route 1,000 times. And I was waiting as long as I could before we busted into Gatwick's controlled airspace, and he just went, wait a second. And then he looked down, and you could just see the cogs turning, and he looked down at his plug, and then he looked at the DI, and then he looked outside, then he looked at his chart, and he went, oh shit. Oh, and then he turned left. I was like, yes, gross error check. You did it finally. And no matter how many times you tell people, do a gross error check because you will read the wrong number off your plug, they never do it. And finally he did it. And he was like, all right, I'm always going to do that now. And I was like, I know you will, because we both, you almost bust into controlled airspace, and I'm glad that you caught it before. And I think now he's very regimented with it. But it's nice when you just keep telling these people these things, and then they finally work it out for themselves.
With like controlled airspace, how does that work for you in the UK? I mean, I understand how it works here. I mean, is it just where the major airports are? Do you always have to be talking to somebody, or how does that work there?
Firstly, if you are interested, you should definitely try and check out a VFR chart of the south of England. It's the busiest airspace in the world. It's absolutely amazing to train in. So we've got, within about 40, 50 miles of where I train, there's probably 6 main international airports. There's a load of business jet stuff. There's military stuff. Pretty much everywhere you fly, you are released underneath the London Terminal Manoeuvring Area, which is where the main airports manoeuvre. So that generally sits above everything that we fly in, above 2,500 feet. Then we've got our airfield itself is within London, within Heathrow's control zone, but we've got a special agreement that we can fly up to 1,500 feet. But we're about probably 5 miles away from Heathrow, where I'm based. And then out to the west from us, we've got Farnborough, which is the main kind of biz jet. It's where all the Global Express and stuff come in from around the world. So if you look up Fair Oaks, Echo Golf Tango Foxtrot, you'll see where we slot into it all. But essentially, 99% of the time, you've got a base of controlled airspace above you at 2,500 feet. The further you get out from London, obviously it steps up a bit. We do Heathrow transits all the time, and we teach our students to do that from the beginning as well, because it's so important. they let us do a VFR transit across the corner of their airspace, which is quite nice. And then we do zones transits via Farnborough. We do that quite a lot as well. And we do a load of ATZ transits. We also have military air traffic zones that weirdly are, to civilians, you can fly into without a clearance. But obviously it's bad airmanship to do so. So we always make sure that people get a clearance to do that. But yeah, around where we are, it is incredibly busy airspace, and the airspace charts are very, very complex.
I just pulled one up. I'm like, oh goodness, there's a lot of stuff on here.
Yes. It's funny, when you start teaching people about airspace, there's like, oh wow, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's like, yeah, but most of that doesn't apply. I mean, we have class Alpha. There's not really any class Bravo. There's no class Charlie. We have Delta. There's a bit of Echo, but that doesn't apply to us VFR guys. Foxtrot is advisory. We don't really use that. And then we have Golf. So really, there's Class A, which you can't go into. There's Delta, which you need a clearance. And then there's everything else. So really, we've only got 3 categories of airspace around us. So that kind of already makes it a bit simpler. And generally, the Class Delta, they have to have a good reason not to give you a clearance through it. But yeah, we talk a lot to Heathrow and also to Farnborough. And they provide a lower airspace radar service. So like with your flight following, we get a basic service from them. And they just, keep an eye on you, basically.
So we might be off the topic a bit from the transition portion of things, but I think that learning more about how you guys fly over there is really fascinating. So I understand you guys have something called like a listening service. It's a little bit different than our flight following. Can you explain that to us?
If you're listening to a frequency on the charts, it has in brackets below it the squawk. That is the code that you put in. And and it just means that you pop on their screen, they know that you're listening to them and they can contact you. So they might say, Ferrex, are you on frequency?
Yeah, that's different.
And then you respond to it. You've never spoken to them. They don't know your details. They don't know anything about you. All they know is, that you are listening. So it's quite useful if you're flying quite close to the edge of their airspace. It kind of puts their mind at ease. But it means you don't have to do this whole. I don't know how you guys do it when you want to when we want to get a service from someone in outside controlled airspace, like a basic service, which is basically flight following. You ask for it, and then they say pass your message, and you have to give them the whole spiel. I'm from Cessna 152 from Ferrex to Ferrex. Currently, I've had Guildford, 1,500 feet on 1021, request basic service. On a busy day when they've got combined frequencies and they're vectoring people in and out, in biz jets, the last thing I want to bother them with is me just going to do general handling. So it just relieves the workload from them. And if they need to talk to me, they can. But otherwise, we leave each other alone because they know if we've got, they know who we are, we know who they are. But there's times when I need to get up into their CTA to do some stalls, basically, because the base is at 2.5, and obviously I want to do stalling a bit higher than that. So quite often, if I just say, hey, can I get an area entry for 20 minutes into CTA 4, 3,500 feet VFR, they'll generally give it to us. And sometimes they might move us out of the way to get a jet through, but generally they're very, very helpful with us. So,
what advice would you give someone who's considering maybe a little bit later in life switching into a career in aviation?
It's never too late, right? I mean, every single person is different. And what I love about aviation is that there is no set path. It's not like becoming like a doctor where you have to do the same thing. Every single person that I've ever spoken to that flies has found a different way to get into it. So I think that's really cool. Is like you'll find your own path. If you want it enough, you'll find your own way in. Tour managing was like that as well, to be honest. If you wanted to do it enough, you would find the way. Advice for people older in life, probably make sure that your brain is capable of it. I think I started late, but not so late that my brain is still capable. And obviously the later you leave it, the worse your brain is. I mean, I teach 14-year-olds to fly, and it's just hilarious how good they are. They can trim out straight and level in their first flight, and they can level off within 20 feet and just hold it. And then I'm teaching 6-year-old men who have retired and they've always wanted to fly, and they're finally learning, and it takes them weeks to learn to do that. And so, it's no coincidence. Neuroplasticity is definitely real. And the older you get, your brain is like a dried up eraser. It's just useless. So I guess I would say to people, if they are later in life and they want to try and do commercial flying, is probably, I would say the older you are, the more you should be sure that you're capable of doing it. So you should probably go and do a PPL first. And if you can hack that and you feel like you've still got capacity, then by that point, you're probably okay, I would have thought. But I would probably say there's probably a kind of way you probably don't want to try and jump straight into doing an integrated course because your brain just might not have the capacity to deal with it, which is so sad. As I said, there are people who have not been able to afford to learn to fly until they could retire. And by that point, some of them I'm teaching, I'm thinking, you might never be able to, you may not never be safe enough or good enough to get through a skills test, which is tragic because they've waited their whole lives to do it. Also, flying over here is way more expensive than you guys have it. So I think
I was going to ask you that.
So generally like a 2-hour block with an instructor and an aircraft with briefing and landing and fuel and all this stuff in a Cessna 152 costs about £250, which is probably what, maybe $350. I don't know how much it costs you guys for, say, an hour of flight training, but it's not cheap here for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there other things that come into play other than like the aircraft, the fuel expenses, and the instructor? Are there other fees that you guys pay that we're not? There's not like landing fees or anything like that.
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, of course, because you guys have it kind of subsidized like a government thing, right? It's like infrastructure, so it's taken care of. But then you pay like FBO fees instead, right? Like handling or not?
Depends on the airport. If it's a smaller airport, you won't.
Okay.
The larger airports, you will.
Yeah. No, I mean, our landing fees, even in a basic grass strip, you're looking at probably $20 for a 152 kind of thing. So it adds up quickly. Where I did my PPL was at Biggin Hill, which is, the kind of famous World War II Hurricane and Spitfire base. The landing fee when I was doing circuits there was, I think it was £38 per touch and go, which is probably close to $45-50 per touch and go.
Every time you touch the runway.
Every single time.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So every other lesson I was having to top my account back up with, like £1,000. It was horrible, but I didn't know any different. And where I was living at the time, that was the only airfield I could get to because I didn't have a car. So I had no choice. Now where I'm training now, where I instruct, it's amazing. We, as a flight school, pay for a landing card for the aircraft for the year, and our students don't pay for touch and goes. So every other airfield around here, we have students coming to us going, "Oh, you guys are a bit more expensive." I said, "Yeah, but how much do you pay for circuits? What, £10 a touch and go?" "Yeah, we don't charge at all." And you think how many you do throughout your training? Yeah. Trust me, we're cheaper.
That adds up, I'd imagine.
It really does. Yeah. You're basically adding on $130 a lesson just in touch and go fees.
Wow.
Yes, it's horrible.
Yeah, interesting differences.
Yeah. It's fun. I mean, it's a great thing about aviation, right? It's good fun talking to people that have the same experiences, but different kind of context to it all.
Right. That's what I was just thinking. Same but different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a huge thank you to David for coming on the Fly the Transition podcast and sharing not just his story of transition in aviation, but also a bit about flying in England. I really thought that was a fascinating part of this interview, and I hope you enjoyed that as well. I do have one update from David as far as his flying career is concerned. He's not just working on instruction anymore. He has just landed a job as a first officer on a King Air, and he'll be looking to start that gig in early 2024. So congrats, David, on that progression in your career. I know I'm excited to see where you go with things with your flying, and maybe in the future we can bring you back on and get an update. So let's talk about next week's episode. This is not your traditional flying job that we'll talk about next week. Joining me will be Kyle Lewis, who is the regional manager for the Great Lakes region with AOPA. Now, those of you who are fans of the sitcom The Office, I have a really hard time with his title because I always want to say assistant to the regional manager. I don't know if he finds it as funny as I do, but it's funny to me. So we will talk all about how Kyle began down the path of going into a career in aviation, but along the way found his way to becoming a state trooper. So we'll talk about his job as a state trooper and his journey to becoming one of the regional managers with AOPA. So as we wrap up this episode of Fly the Transition, thank you so very much for joining me and listening to another episode. If you like what I'm doing and want to help get the word out, one of the best ways you can help out is by going on to whatever podcast service you're listening on and leaving a rating or a review. Not only does it help get the word out, but it feeds the algorithms of the podcast machines to help get this podcast to more ears. So if you'd be so kind to leave a rating, I would certainly appreciate it. And if you or someone you know want to be a guest on the Fly the Transition podcast, I'm always looking for more stories to share. So you can reach me at any of my social medias, or you can send an email at flythetransition@gmail.com to be considered for a future episode. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of Fly the Transition. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.